Before dawn broke over London, the city already breathed in flour. It hung in the air like fog, pale, weightless, endless. If you stood near the narrow alleys of the East End, you could taste it on your tongue, dust and bread, coal and sweat. Down below, where the light never reached, men worked in basements no wider than a stable. Each room glowed dimly with the orange pulse of an oven, the air thick with heat and smoke. Their shirts clung to them, soaked through before the first loaf even rose. Some worked barefoot. Others tied cloth over their mouths, trying to filter the dust that drifted like snow. The sound was constant, the thud of dough against wood, the rasp of shovels, the hiss of coal. No one spoke much. There wasn't air enough for that. Above them, London slept, millions of people who would wake to the smell of warm bread, never knowing that the same bread had stolen the air of those who made it. They were called journeyman bakers, and for decades they fed Britain one loaf at a time until the work itself began to consume them. Few remember that in Victorian London, baking was one of the most dangerous jobs a man could have, because in those years the very dust that promised life was also, quietly, taking it away. The Victorian era stretched from 1837 to 1901, a time when Britain transformed faster than at any point in its history. Factories rose, trains thundered, and the population of London tripled from fewer than 2 million souls to over 6 million. All those people had to eat, and most of them ate bread. For the working poor, a loaf was not a luxury, it was survival. It filled the stomach when meat was rare and kept hunger at bay for another day. To have one's bread meant to live. So every morning in homes and boarding houses, the first smell people knew was that of yeast and heat. At street level, bakeries displayed golden loaves in small windows, their glass clouded by steam. But most of London's bread didn't come from those tidy shops. It came from what lay beneath them, the cellars, the basements, the underworld of flour and fire. By mid-century, those underground rooms worked through the night to meet the city's endless appetite. A report from 1860 pleaded with the public to stop demanding hot breakfast rolls, begging Londoners to ameliorate the bondage of the bakehouse. But no one stopped ordering. To meet the morning rush, bakers began their day at 3 a.m., and for every loaf that made its way to a breakfast table, there was a man below who had already been awake for 10 hours. Bread was feeding Britain, but the men who made it were running out of breath. Their work was brutal, their surroundings worse. Most bakehouses were built beneath the pavement, beneath shops or boarding houses, without windows or fresh air. A journalist called them dungeons dismal, dirty and pestiferous. The floor was damp, the drainage foul, and the air thick with fumes from coal and leaking gas pipes. Some bakeries were so small that the men had to knead dough in troughs with their elbows and knees. Others used their feet, an ancient practice, the records said, continued from the most barbarous ages up to our own times. Each sack of flour weighed nearly 280 pounds. It took 4 men to lift one. They mixed it in great wooden bins, their arms plunging into the dough again and again until their shoulders burned and sweat ran down their foreheads. Sweat that fell directly into the dough they worked. An observer wrote that streams of perspiration flowed and mingled with the elementary substance. The flour itself was rarely pure. Good wheat was expensive and profits were thin. So millers and bakers began to improve it, adding chalk, plaster of Paris, even ground bone to make it whiter and heavier. Some added alum, a chemical that trapped water and gave the illusion of fine, rich flour. The practice had been outlawed in 1758, but by the 1850s it was everywhere again. One baker admitted that a loaf could be as little as 2/3 flour, the rest powdered deceit. And yet people kept buying it. To them it looked clean and white, a symbol of prosperity. They didn't know that every slice carried the taste of chalk, coal, and the air of a cellar. The bread that sustained a city was being made in places where men could barely stand to breathe. The human cost soon became impossible to ignore. A study in Edinburgh in 1848 examined over 100 bakers. Nearly all of them showed signs of severe lung inflammation. Doctors began to call it baker's lung, later known as baker's asthma. Flour dust filled the air of the bakehouses and coated every surface. When inhaled day after day, it scoured the lungs like sandpaper. Coal dust only made it worse. Some men developed constant coughs, others coughed up blood. Most never reached old age. The average lifespan of a baker was barely 33 years. They also suffered from rheumatism, heart palpitations, and skin infections caused by heat and moisture. Many slept on the floor beside their ovens, not by choice, but because their employers locked the doors at night to prevent them from leaving. Still, every dawn they rose to knead again, for 12, 16, sometimes 20 hours. By Saturday afternoon, they were half dead from exhaustion, but it was their only break. They slept through Sunday morning and were condemned for skipping church. Others spent that brief freedom in alehouses, trying to forget the week. One writer compared them to the knife grinders of Sheffield, men who inhaled metal dust until their lungs turned grey. Both trades, he wrote, lived to feed the nation and died of what they breathed. No statues were built for them, no songs were written, but in every loaf they made there was a fragment of their own lives, pressed, baked, and sold before the sun rose. Change did come, slowly, unevenly, and far too late for most. By the 1860s, inventors were trying to rescue the trade. In Dublin, a man named John Jellicoe built a machine that could knead dough without hands or feet, promising to end what he called the uncleanly and injurious habit of night work. He even boasted that bakers could finally work in daylight. But the problem wasn't just the labor, it was the world they worked in. Most bakehouses were too small to fit machinery, and most unders too poor or too stubborn to buy it. Many feared that the machines would cost them their jobs. Then came a bigger idea, the aerated bread company. Its machines could produce 40 loaves in 40 minutes, replacing yeast with carbonic acid gas. The bread rose fast, light, and uniform, a miracle of modern progress. For the first time, bread could be made almost entirely by machine. But there was a cost even there. The bread lacked the flavor of yeast. It tasted of nothing at all. And as factories took over, the small bakehouses began to fade, along with the men who had once filled them. By the end of Queen Victoria's reign, the era of the journeyman baker was ending. The same industrial progress that had once trapped them underground now pushed them out into daylight, or out of work altogether. Few mourned their passing. London still woke to the smell of bread, but no one thought much anymore about who made it, or what it once cost. Today, the world of the Victorian baker is long gone. The cellars are silent, the ovens cold, their walls swallowed by new buildings and new lives. But if you could stand there again, in that dim, airless heat, you might still hear it. The scrape of a shovel, the soft fall of flour, the rhythm of work that once kept a city alive. The bread itself was ordinary, white, cheap, forgettable, but its story was not. It tells us what industrial progress truly cost. The air men breathed, the years they lost, the simple pride of making something by hand. They gave everything for a trade that gave them nothing in return. In every age, there are those who feed others and go unseen. In Victorian London, they were the bakers, men who lived in the shadow of their own ovens, who fed millions and died before anyone learned their names. The bread that fed Britain did more than fill its stomachs. It built its cities, its families, its mornings, and it carried in every crumb the quiet breath of the men who made it, the breath that London forgot. Their story is gone from the streets, but not from the air, because for a time the city itself was made of flour, and in that pale dust, that strange floating ghost of bread, the memory of its makers still lingers.